Welcome to Gold Coast Insider, where we bring you business insights, stories, opportunities and forecasts from movers and shakers across the Gold Coast. I'm your host, Estella Rodiguero. I'm CEO of Regional Development Australia Gold Coast. My guest today is Dr Clare Burns. Dr Clare is a passionate corporate sustainability, business ethics and organisational culture researcher. For the past 7 years, Clare has been teaching undergraduate, postgraduate and MBA students in business management. Now, before re-entering academia, Clare worked for 18 years in corporate communications, management, marketing and media and organisational development in Australia and overseas. And during this time, she wrote speeches, releases and strategic plans for ministers and Premier, worked at Telstra in investor relations and lived in an African war zone. Outside of work, Clare is a volunteer and non-executive director of Rosies Friends on the street. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you so much, Estella. Great to be with you.
Yeah, great to chat to you. Look, I can't go past lived in an African war zone. You really have to tell us that story.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It seems a bit random, but it to say the grand scheme of life, all these different activities that we do, sometimes there is the jigsaw puzzle that they do fit together. So I did that when I was in my early 20s and I've been living in England and Ireland. But in terms of the lead up to that, I've been volunteering since I was at least 16. And my family have a bit of a history of volunteering, except my mother and father, they'll never call it volunteering. It's just what you do. So I initially went to Africa, to Zimbabwe, to teach English. But then when I arrived in Zimbabwe, the people who said that they would meet me, they weren't there. And then I tried to call them and the phones didn't work. And it wasn't looking so good.
But keep going.
Yeah, but then fortunately, it's great to be, anyway, have an agile mindset. Fortunately, or a growth mindset, some people, they took compassion on me and they drove me to where the volunteer organisation was in Zimbabwe. And I arrived there and I said, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you are supposed to be here. And then they told me that, well, actually, sorry, the schools are closed because there've been civil unrest. And, yeah, the phones are down. But don't worry, we're going to send you off to a rural area called Rosies, and you're going to effectively grow different types of vegetables and produce because their diets were quite poor. It was really reliant on a thing called sudza, which is cornmeal, which isn't a bad thing, but just when that's the only thing in your diet, that's not so good because we need all different types of nutrients for us. So life started getting a little bit better, particularly after a week of being in this rural area where there was no electricity, no running water. But there was great beauty. But unfortunately, there was that war that was erupting. Mugabe was in power. There was an election coming up. And so, white farmers were being driven off their land. Lots of things going on with war starting to erupt when I first arrived. And then by the end, there are a lot more, a lot of people with a lot more guns. People were being killed in the near area. If they saw me, they might try, and they didn't know me, a random car might try and drive you off the road. So after a couple of months, we did have to leave because it was a war zone. But it was a fascinating insight in terms of, say, what corruption can do, but great privilege to walk alongside people in that area. And just the peace that you can get sometimes when you really strip back all the other external things that we really rely upon in the developed world. You can really live with very little and be very happy.
So the conditions would have been quite basic, wouldn't they? Did you have electricity? Did you have anything like that?
No electricity, no running water. And I remember, I think after 3 months, some of us, we hopped on the back of a few trucks and we went to kind of like the nearest township. I remember seeing electricity for the first time in 3 months and thinking, that just looks so artificial. and now living where I am and doing what I couldn't live without electricity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it was. I'm grateful for kind of like growing up and being from a family where you just give things a go.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was then your pathway to your passion, which of course is that corporate sustainability, business ethics, and organisational culture. What was the pathway from being in an African war zone through to doing what you do today?
Yeah, it doesn't appear to be, again, that linear, but then some of the things around justice. So justice for people who have been oppressed, but also justice for how we treat the environment, because when we don't treat the environment right, we end up paying the cost. Or when we say we, it's really that big collective we, because we mightn't see it, particularly in the developing or in the developed world, but there are people paying the cost of that. So something that I really like about the concept of corporate sustainability is that it is so multi-dimensional, that it has that economic element, the environmental and the social. And you can't drop any of those, that it really needs to be considered as a whole. And so some of the ways that I was living in Africa, it was really kind of like walking in that space, because some of the people's diet and with the environment, how you're using the environment so that it would be sustainable for them, because a lot of them were farmers and they were really living on the land. But then when you've got corruption and when you've got some of those economic elements that are not considered. So I remember seeing people sitting in cars for 2 or 3 days to get petrol, and seeing the notes in Zimbabwe to say the inflation, kind of like, I forgot counting the number of zeros that were at the end of that. So when we get mismanagement, there's huge consequences, and often those consequences most hit people who are the most vulnerable. So in terms of, from a social justice perspective more broadly, there is that connection between them.
And it is interrelated. So if we move into the business world and we move into organisation, or the organisation, the relationship between organisational culture and corporate sustainability initiatives and practices such as the cleaner production is widely recognised, yet little is known about an organisational culture conducive to that sustainability. So you come in now, and that's where your passion's brought you to. Do you want to talk us through that model and what that potentially looks like?
Yeah, so I worked in industry for many years, and as you said, in the corporate communication space, and I could write things to do with values that I believed in and that the organisation wanted to say it was doing, and I could get some of those things into the press, and it's in the corporate document, it's on the website, but I increasingly got frustrated that organisations weren't walking the talk. And when I say organisations, both profit organisations, as well as in commercial organisations, as well as government, and to a smaller degree, some not-for-profits as well too. And how do I bell this cat in terms of how do I get organisations to walk the talk? So that's what really led me into taking a deeper dive into organisational culture and seeing the real challenges that arise when you start to do that. Because by its very nature, corporate sustainability asks you to think differently. Now, a lot of people, they were traditionally trained either at a university or TAFE, or what they saw other people doing within the organisation, which is just primarily thinking about profit. And that's the only way that you make decisions. Now, I will never say that you don't need to make a profit. You do, even if you're a not-for-profit, you don't have a mission without a margin. But when that's the only thing considered, then actually those other values that you espouse, they drop off. So it's actually challenging the mindsets of a lot of people. This is where the rubber hits the road. Yeah. And so I was fascinated what happens when that arrives in a large organisation, where a director might say the right words, but then their expectation of what's the lived reality is quite different. And how do people at the middle level and on the front line, how do they make sense of that? And that fascinated me, and it still fascinates me. And even though directors they continue to say that they're doing the right thing, we know in reality that it's not happening. We will be far more advanced in the sustainability space if people had actually walked the talk.
And this is a multi-layered culture, isn't it? Cultural and sustainability initiative, isn't it? Like you can't have one without the other. And you can't have, and I think you were saying something about, is it people, planet and profit at some stage? You were talking about that. I mean, you can't have one in isolation, can you? And in a business world, so it also is your culture and your workers, isn't it, which you have to bring along on that journey.
Yeah, because it's no use if you only have one or two people, and you can't just have effectively just helicopter a sustainability unit in. When they've tried to do that in Europe, in some finance organisations, what they had, also because the directors, they weren't walking the talk with their decision making. So people were still taking their lead from the directors. They role modeled things after the directors. So the directors said, okay, there's lots of regulations coming in. We need to do more about sustainability. Okay, we'll drop in a sustainability unit. But it wasn't integrated throughout the organisation. And then you get some subcultures who are able to pick it up and understand it and grasp it, then other cultures who aren't. So what they found in the finance area was the areas that were more financial planning, the hardcore accountants, some of the investment areas, they had that mindset that you don't consider anything else. Actually, all other considerations than the economic, that's invalid. That's not. Whereas, say, you've got some other areas such as marketing and human resources and the people on the front line advising customers. They grasp some of the concepts of sustainability because they could see the human impact a little bit easier. So then you get these two subcultures clashing, and sometimes they would call it. One group will call them, okay, so you're the money-making soldiers. Okay, so you're the tree huggers. And what happened in Europe in some instances, because the directors, they didn't manage culture, they didn't really take accountability for the sustainability piece, is that it didn't just stay within the organisation. People outside started saying, no, actually, you're not walking the talk. And there was significant reputational damage done to it.
Why? If I was a business, why should I? Why should I look at this? The sustainability, my sustainability practices. I mean, I could be a good citizen, and I could, yes, I'm going to worry about global warming and turtles that are dying from in the ocean, which apparently is at record levels at the moment. But why? Why me? Why should I, as a business, incorporate that?
Yeah, quite a few dimensions there, and it's a really good question. And also because we do need to be quite aware of greenwashing, which is in the space. And we should, in some instances, we shouldn't be paying additional money for greenwashing at all.
And greenwashing is falsifying, isn't it? It's that unsubstantiated claims, correct?
Yeah. So some people might say, why should I jump on this bandwagon? Is it just a fad that's going to go away? And the reality is it's not going to go away. The concept of sustainability, the core concept of it. So some of the reasons, one key reason, even if you're not going to do it from it's the right thing to do and for the altruistic reasons of being a good citizen, is from a pure risk perspective. So even though we have always had some in Australia kind of like floods and droughts, and we've got poems about that from eons ago. But our rates of floods and droughts and extreme weather events are increasing. And if you're not going to believe me, then believe what you're being asked to pay into, to say, insurance, because the actuaries, they're really aware of these costs. So you can't deny that these things aren't happening more frequently. Mm-hmm. And if you have been through a flood or a drought, you would be aware that there are real impacts to your workforce, and there's real impact from that bottom line for it. So I really commend you for the fabulous work that you've done to say the risk analysis for small businesses. So larger organisations, they're considering some of those risks, but for the smaller businesses, there's so many different elements of it, and therefore being prepared, because it's not a matter of if, it's when.
Yeah.
So that's if people haven't already looked at your website or received the newsletter update about some of the things to consider from a risk perspective, I highly encourage people to do that. And something that I really like about the way your area has done that is that the language is really accessible. And towards the end of it, you've also got some really helpful case studies for it. So it doesn't need, you don't need a PhD in sustainability to start being in that space. So that's one thing in terms of risk, and risk in terms of both treating your employees well, retaining employees, but definitely from those costs, so you can mitigate some of those risks. And there's also
So you actually also, sorry butting in, but you just made me aware that even though you're talking about the rates of floods and droughts, ultimately as a business sitting here on the Gold Coast, that affects us, even if it's not in the very least economically, to buy groceries, to buy food product. And when we've just been hit with hail in our food bowl, that actually impacts, doesn't it? So it does. It has a direct impact to us. It doesn't have, we can't sit here and say, well, we haven't had a flood or a fire, we're fine. But that's not the case.
No, the supply chain. And often people think, oh, the supply chain, it's not very sexy. Why should I bother looking at that or tracing that? Well, I am fascinated by the supply chain, and of course, say some sustainability approaches is really chasing that supply chain. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's a lot of references to the supply chain of looking kind of like along the way. And where do those Sustainable Development Goals, where are some of those touch points for it? And there is another resource which people are probably familiar with, the UN Sustainable Development Goal Compass. And with that, it has a few ways of really looking at your supply chain. But before you can do that, there is also developing that understanding and awareness. So it makes it really difficult to see the relevance of sustainability until you've got a little bit more awareness of what that encompasses, because it does encompass more than the greenwashing. There's those other elements. So there's that factor as well too. And then there's other contributing things that might be a little bit more indirect. So in Queensland, on the 1st of April this year, they introduced the psychosocial hazards. And even with psychosocial hazards, temperature, workplace temperature, workplace temperature is part of the psychosocial hazard. So if it's either really hot or really cold, then actually potentially you're creating a psychosocial hazard within your work environment. So have you considered that at all, what impact that has for your staff? There's also other concepts such as bullying, because bullying is part of, if we talk about environmental social governance, some of our other sustainable development goals such as SDG, which is different work and employment, that fits into it as well. So in terms of, if you don't want to think about sustainability more broadly, well, at least you want to do your CYA, which is covering your, so that your organisation isn't up for being accused of psychosocial hazards in the short term versus a whole lot of other things as well too. So that's just a few things to consider, let alone that concept of externalities as well too, which might come back to you at a different stage. So we know with some directors of large organisations, some of them are now starting to become quite concerned to say some of the decisions that they make to do with supply chain, to do with other elements, actually they were really contributing to some really negative externalities that have big implications. And so they may face kind of like being brought up from a legal perspective for actions that they took maybe 1 or 2 years ago.
Yeah. So this is a big subject though, isn't it? I mean, it's as you say, it's people, planet, and profit. And so we're looking at a business, and it can be a cafe, can't it? It can be recyclable cups. But it's also about the people they employ, and then it's also about how does that affect the wider picture. So there's a lot to unpack in this. Like when you start down this, there's a lot in it. And then let's just look at what is the impetus for it. So we've got the 2032 Olympics.
Yeah, and it was quite wonderful. The other week here at Bond University, I organised an ESG, Environmental Social Governance Nexus, a symposium, and we had a number of Gold Coast organisations who wanted to come along so that they can place themselves in the best position for the upcoming Olympics, because we know, and on your website as well too, sometimes you refer to it even from a risk perspective, you want to have a competitive advantage. So with the Gold Coast Olympics, obviously there's going to be numerous government contracts around, and if an organisation, they're aware of what their emissions are, they've considered the social elements as well too. They've considered the sustainable development goals. They've got that mindset. Therefore, they're in a much better position to put in a bid or a tender. Also, from that perspective of even if it wasn't the Olympics, even if you're a small to medium-sized organisation and you're wanting to sell your products to a larger organisation, so therefore you're part of that supply chain, if you know what your emissions are, if you can really give that organisation confidence that you're really well across the sustainability piece, well, effectively you're cutting out a headache for them, because now with the international sustainability standards, well, actually you need to be accountable for your emissions all down your supply chain. So if you can say, here we are, we know exactly what our emissions are, we're doing these other things, so you don't have to be afraid that we're not engaging in modern slavery. We've considered kind of like some of the psychosocial hazards as well too, and also with this particular product or service, some of the other potential externalities, and we've addressed that. Well, people are going to want to choose or see what your product offering is far more preferential to an organisation that hasn't considered that, because effectively you've cut out a headache for them.
So you get that competitive edge, don't you? And I do know in government tendering and government projects, we have that whole ESG built into that as part of the accountability for the organisation who's going for it. But can I circle back to just a sentence you said about modern slavery?
So a lot of people in Australia don't think that Australia needs to think about modern slavery at all. But there's a few things. We live in a global environment, the clothes that we wear, the phones that we use, the food that we eat as well too. So there are now 50 million modern slaves. And unfortunately, that's a figure that's increasing. So I think around 2016, it might have been 43 million, but now we're up to 50 million. And so we're not getting better in that space. So there's still this global greed that exists. And it's not just countries. We know the countries that are a bigger offender, or areas that are bigger offenders of it. So we certainly know Asia, it's a lot that happens there. I've got a lot of good Asian friends, a lot of good Asian businesses, but we just know, to say modern slavery, it does occur more in that area than any other area. It does certainly occur in Africa, in Saudi Arabia, other Middle Eastern countries, not Saudi Arabia. But in Australia, we have 41,000 modern slaves. And 41,000.
So here in Australia.
You're in Australia. So potentially you've walked past a modern slave, because often they're hidden in plain sight.
Okay. So what is a modern slave? I mean, okay, what is modern slavery? Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I don't have the exact textbook, but effectively it's exploiting people, and it's not effectively recognising the dignity and respect that they have and that they deserve it for being a human being. So you're not paying them a fair wage. So if you're wearing a T-shirt that you bought for maybe $5, then if you think of everything along the supply chain, most probably the person who put that T-shirt together was paid about 30 cents. Also, if you think of the cotton growers as well too, and if there's multiple people on the supply chain just for the cotton element, well, once you get past all those middlemen or all those middle people, the actual cotton grower, they probably weren't paid a fair wage either with it. If we think of some of our technology, I've got an Apple iPhone. I try not to replace that very often, but I know that, to say Apple, they have a number of different suppliers for their sources of lithium. Kind of like often we know in Congo, there's lithium that goes down a mine. Well, some of those mines are really small. So if some of them send their 4-year-old children down those mines because they're so desperate, because they don't have any other source of reliable income. And sometimes those 4-year-old children, they don't come back up. So in Australia, in terms of how does that manifest? How do we see it? To say I'm modern slaves, a few different ways. So certainly, I mentioned before food. Sometimes food is an element of that modern slavery piece. Some of our fruit pickers, they're not paid a fair price, and they're kind of almost held to ransom, because sometimes the people who are conducting, whether or not it be an agency person, they'll withhold their passport. And we often know that that's a common thing that within modern slavery, people do start withholding their passport. I'll give an example of something that touched me quite closely. Was I became aware of a lady, a 28-year-old Brazilian lady, who came to Australia initially to learn English and also to be a nanny, an au pair. And there was an agency that set this up. And at the start, when she arrived, and this was, anyway, when I used to live in Brisbane, everything was great. She was going to school and she was helping look after these 3 children. And she was getting some money as well too. And that was going well. But little bit by little bit, the family started to say, oh, no, actually, we don't really think you should be going to school that much anymore, because we really need you here because you're part of our family now. And they stopped paying her and rather started telling her that actually you owe us money now. And they started kind of like little bit by little bit really eroding her self-esteem. So they started telling her, well, you're just stupid, or nobody will listen to you. And they did remove her passport from her. So we just need to look after this for protection. And the husband in this situation, who used to work in the police, was saying, look, if you try to do anything, I've got friends in the police, and they will come and they will put you in prison. And because English was a second, or maybe I think third language, and this is often the case when English is a second or third language, when they've not got their normal support systems around, like family, people that they trust. So they're really quite vulnerable to that. So this lady, I ended up convincing her. It took us 2 or 3 goes. She came and stayed with me for a couple of months, and it took her a while just to even get her self-esteem back, to realise actually that family actually owed her money, and worked with the Fair Work Ombudsman. And the Fair Work Ombudsman, they weren't surprised at all, and they just said, no, we see a lot of this, particularly with the South Americans, that this happens quite a bit. Now, this person who became my friend, she didn't want to anyway, effectively take that family to the Fair Work Ombudsman. But at least he started to realise, hang on, this wasn't right. This wasn't the right way to be treated. But something that really stuck with me was effectively that family, the wife in that situation, she had a role not dissimilar to what role I had working in government communications, middle management. Just how that greed can seep in. So then there's other examples of modern slavery, such as sex trafficking. Certainly people come to Australia, learn English, give us your passport, okay, take a loan with us, and then they arrive in Australia and effectively they're sold out as prostitutes. People are withholding their passports and say, look, you owe us money because we paid for your transport out here. And it's a debt effectively that they keep on accumulating, so they keep on putting interest upon interest, so that they can never pay it back effectively. So there's multiple ways of how modern slavery manifests in Australia, just as there are in Asia. So even people think, oh, well, that's just people who are not educated. But no, that's actually not the case. So in Asia, we know that, say, they've just finished university, they're looking for a job, they see a job in another country, they fly over for that job and then once they arrive, the job isn't what it says it would be. And they're away from that, again, that family, that support structure. And so therefore they're asked to engage in things such as fraud, the online dating space, and other things that it's corrupt, it's awful, and they feel stuck there. So unfortunately, it's part of the reality with globalization. There's been really good things, but this has not been a shining light on us as a people, as a global community.
And to be quite truthful with you, I always saw it as a major problem for Asia, those the countries that we really hear of. I never realised that it was here in Australia to the extent it is. That's actually really sad. But there hasn't been a spotlight on that, has there, that I'm aware of?
No, there is a little bit in the press that you see. So if you Google modern slavery in Australia, you'll see little bits here and there, but it's not featured, very, very highly. And also the organisations and the people that are associated with it, obviously they're wanting to keep it quiet. But there have been, so some of the things such as in Melbourne, there was a high profile case of a nanny and being treated really, really poorly. And also sometimes when English is their second or third language, they're embarrassed that they've got into this position. They don't want to press charges. And so therefore it doesn't actually go to court, or it doesn't reach that higher level as well too. Yeah.
So we get back to organisations and businesses, and there's many tools for developing and sustaining a high-performance organisational culture. Part of those tools must be including your hiring practices, your onboarding. Is that
absolutely? Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And just earlier during this week, I was teaching into a responsible and sustainable organisation class, and just making students aware that, you're learning these different skills, and they're for a very real reason, because LinkedIn, they did a report earlier this year. And in terms of, say, the green skills and the green jobs, well, we're talking whether it be 1 in 8 into, say, needing at least some basic green skills, but also some of the jobs at the moment, kind of like whether it be between 1 in 8 or 25%, which is 1 in 4 jobs, where you need to be considering those green skills. And it's almost becoming what we refer to as a hygiene factor. So just a normal everyday factor. People, the recruiters are looking for people with those skills, not just as a big added extra, but just as normal. Yeah. So if we think about,
sorry, keep going. Yeah.
So if we think about accounting and the accounting space, so halfway through next year, some of those international sustainability standards, well, if you're an organisation in the capital markets, you're going to be reporting on that. And then eventually we're going to see it push down into other smaller, medium-sized organisations to be doing your accounting, factoring in some of those sustainability standards as well.
Wow. So what do you see as some of the practices that organisations can actually start? Like, where would you start? But I guess I'm confused, because at one end of the scale we have the little coffee shop that I go to, whether it's recyclable cups, whatever, and at the other end we've got these multinationals. So if we were looking, let's look at the SMEs. Where would they start? Like, where do we start? And given that the younger generation, or the generation coming up now, are really savvy, aren't they? They're really into the sustainability, but the businesses probably aren't at that level. But the demand's going to come from our younger generation that are coming through. There's going to be a huge demand for that, because they're very aware of it. It's their world that we're leaving it to. So
absolutely.
As a business. So, Clay, can I take a business as a coffee shop? What are we going to do?
Okay, great example. So let's start there. Okay, so there's a few different prongs that you could approach this. I certainly know at Bond University we have, even just starting off, people, small business, they're really busy. Even starting off doing a micro-credentials course. So Bond University, we have a micro-credentials course to start getting you into that headspace of what are some of the things to consider from a business perspective.
Right. Even a micro-credential, let's unpack that one really quickly, because I know what that is. But how long do those courses last? For a business that's listening to this as he's driving to work, talk to us about what that looks like.
So we've tried to make it really accessible to use small to medium-sized business owners. So, and even people who are large businesses, just wanted to get across this. So with our ESG micro-credential at Bond, it's about 7.5 hours. It's online, so you can do it at whatever time suits you. Yeah. So we really want to make it accessible to as many people as possible. There are other people who are doing their masters, or even a lot of the MBAs that are out there as well too, have a big focus on the sustainability, because it does need to be embedded. It can't just be a little bit of a bolt-on from it. So it's from an education piece. Going to other things like I said, we had the ESG day for us. Some organisations, well, anyway, as in government organisations such as yourselves, had that wonderful Business Week event, which was just fantastic. But something that I really liked about the way that business event was structured is that you had real people from real organisations talking about what they were doing. And so if you are a small coffee shop, potentially, maybe doing an online microcredential, but also really getting in contact with other people who are doing best practice in that space. So whether or not it's other people around the Gold Coast area who are doing well and doing good in that space. And hopefully those people also share their challenges as well too, because I think it's really a bit disingenuous to just say we're all doing well and there's no problem. No, if you enter into this space, kind of like you're going to have challenges, and so that we can be honest enough with each other to share some of those challenges. And if you can't find anybody in your immediate space, Gold Coast, then go a little bit further. And if you're in a niche area, well, go overseas as well too, because Australia, unfortunately, have been laggards in sustainability for many, many years. So we certainly know the Nordic countries in Europe, they're more advanced than us, even because of, say, some of the government opportunities in the US. In some areas, they're doing a little bit better than Australia as well too. So trying to look at some of those best practice approaches, and also making use of some of the great resources that are out there. Your website, the RDA website, has some wonderful resources. There's also the EcoBiz consultant as well too. Yeah. Another thing is just starting off with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I mentioned before the UN SDG Compass. Effectively, there's 5 key things that it says to help you understand Sustainable Development Goals. One is firstly developing an understanding. So you don't just jump into trying to do everything all at once. And even with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we're not going to do all of them well. Even the largest organisations are not going to do all of them well. So firstly, starting to understand that. And that will also help you understand some elements within your supply chain too. It's really helpful that way. And then once you understand that, then it's after that you can start setting some goals that your organisation want to achieve. And we know kind of like one of the basic concept of change and change management is, you do try and get a few of those quick goals to give you a little bit of confidence and to achieve them and build upon those. And then, of course, you start implementing more of them and then reporting and then looking back in terms of, okay, so how can we continue to improve this process? So there are a few different ways of because it can be overwhelming. And as I said before, people are already really time poor. So you do want to make it count. But there are many resources out there. And again, I commend the work that your organisation has been doing in that.
Yeah. And maybe, Claire, it's worthwhile when we post this that we put some links that you might suggest underneath for companies, because I still think there is a lot of information, but it's like going through mud. Like there's so much. It's really much just like, where do we start? Where's the starting point? But I was just thinking while you're talking about that too, if we were looking at a cafe, if I had 2 cafes up the road and one had a sustainability practice where I actually felt like, they're looking after that sustainability, they're looking after all that, and I would go to that place to buy because I'd feel better about myself having my coffee every morning. It sort of alleviates that pressure of, oh my goodness, here we go, I've just ruined the planet again. So, there probably is a bit of an edge for an organisation or a shop to actually start talking about what they're doing and to highlighting that as a selling thing. Do you think?
Absolutely, because I often, and actually I stopped going to some cafes for a little while because I was going to a few different cafes and asking them, where are you sourcing your coffee from? And if they couldn't tell me, that actually it was a supplier whereby the growers weren't being exploited, then I stopped going there and rather buying coffee that I knew. So considering both my social footprint and ecological footprint, because the reality is people in Australia, they live as if we've got 4 globes. So we are overshooting the amount of resources, and that's most of us. So I keep on doing. There's this really fun, and it's good that it's fun, that it's not too taxing. Yeah. It says to say how many Earths effectively with all the things that you're using day to day. How many Earths do you need? And most people are surprised that it's between 4 to 6 Earths that they're using for it. So, and then you start thinking, okay, so what are some of the little things that I can do to make that change? One other thing that I was going to mention as well is that, to say small to medium-sized organisations, I mentioned that there's a number of resources. There's also resources now online where you can get a bit of an understanding of your emissions. So some of the online calculators, so the SME emissions calculated. And in the past, small to medium-sized organisations would often need to get a consultant in to do that work, whereas say you can get a bit of a feel for that yourselves. And certainly starting off, understanding what your emissions are, what your supply chain is, taking stock in terms of whether it be psychosocial hazards, but other elements as well too. If you have some of those basics down, that stands you in really good stead for, to say, with different regulations, and the regulations will keep on changing for a while. But when you've got some of those basics, you'll be able to respond to what those regulations are asking you to report on. So having those foundations, and that's to have those, it's also putting you in that mindset shift, which is quite different. So when you're making the decisions, it's yes, the economic, but the environmental and the social as well too. It's not just once a week sustainability week. We'll consider some green stuff. Rather, it's a day-to-day lived reality. So
I was just sitting here thinking to myself, I think with me it's laziness to a large degree. It's sort of, it's lazy.
It's just an oversight. It's an oversight. You seem to be somebody who enjoys nature and wants to do the right thing. I think most of us do. And it's just really a bit of an oversight. So we start asking those questions. And if we all start asking some of those questions, just as if we go into a retail store, can you tell me a little bit about how the cotton was sourced, or who put these garments together? We start asking some of those questions. It's to say a push and a pull. We are going to be making more ethical choices. And I think when we put our head on the pillow at night, we don't just only think, how much money did I make today or save today? I think all of us wants to think, did I treat people fairly? Did I do the right thing?
Yeah. And I guess, everything, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think, like we live in this beautiful, pristine place, don't we? Like, we live in the best place in the world. The Gold Coast is sensational. We have these gorgeous mountains out the back that I like to climb, and half the coast do, and a lot of other people. But we also our tourism here, and the tourism here is because we are pristine. And I guess that it's all interrelated, isn't it? So
absolutely,
that is interrelated.
Yeah, and if you think that people could choose to go anywhere in the world for a holiday, and if they could come to the Gold Coast, and effectively this is your environmental footprint for coming to the Gold Coast, and make it easy for them to know that actually you come here to the Gold Coast, okay, it's flights or however you get here, so maybe you can offset that. But while they're here on the Gold Coast, if we could make it as easy for them to be achieving net zero for it, and that's a lot of the discussion at the moment with the businesses, how you're working towards net zero, but into to say that attractiveness as well too. Come here, come to the Gold Coast. You won't walk away with a big environmental footprint. Your footprint will be this much rather than this much. And there's some things that we can do in our planning, but also in terms of, say, local tourist operators, the local cafes as well too, whereby they can decrease it. So we do in this area, we do have the beautiful green and gold, the beautiful gold beach, the green. And we've also got, anyway, some wonderful local producers as well too. So obviously, if we're using local producers, we've not got that big kind of like food kilometres. Those are some of those factors. We're also supporting people locally so that they have good jobs, so and they're being paid fairly, so it should say the workers as well there. That there's almost this virtuous circle that starts happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the opportunities for the Gold Coast? Let's bring it back to the Gold Coast. What are the opportunities? And let's talk in that respect, let's talk business and organisation. Let's bring it back to that business and organisation. So what are those opportunities for businesses?
So I think some of the areas within the Gold Coast that have been doing fairly well, but they could be doing better. So I certainly think into, say, some of our education institutions. A lot of people want to come to the Gold Coast to study. They can be doing they could be doing a little bit better. I've already mentioned the environment and ecotourism as well. And I think there's a whole other piece in terms of, say, our green, into, say, the Gold Coast, that we could be doing a lot more in that ecotourism space as well. But we have some existing organisations in the manufacturing and the industrial area in the Gold Coast that people often overlook. And there's a huge untapped space that I'd like to say is an education piece, in terms of we could be doing a lot better in that space, even from just the basics of using more renewable energy. So we've got a lot of really large buildings, flat tops, that don't even have kind of like solar power there as a minimum. And one of the reasons also for doing that is some of these organisations are going to be, as we've mentioned before, are going to be bidding for the Olympics. And to put them in the best position, well, start making those changes now, because even if you don't do it for the Olympics, being more attractive to other people in your supply chain at both ends, you'll just solve a whole lot of people headaches, and, as you said before, kind of like increase that competitiveness, that competitive advantage for it. So there's lots of opportunities here on the Gold Coast where we can do better. So we're already doing fairly well in some spaces, but we can do a lot better from an environmental perspective, and also in some ways from a social perspective as well. I've mentioned before, kind of like I'm a director for Rosies Friends on the Street. We do have a big homelessness issue here on the Gold Coast. I think there's lots of opportunities for business to be considering that a little bit more, and how we can start addressing some of these issues. But that's not just a one person in one area. That's a whole big piece. But if we don't have anybody, because it does seem like a wicked problem at the moment, but if everybody just says, no, that's too big, I can't do it, it's too big a piece, well, then we get nothing done. But there are some little things that organisations can do. And I've been really impressed with some, sorry, I don't remember their names at the moment, with some local organisations here on the Gold Coast who have really been helping Rosie's Friends on the Street from a practical perspective, and also from a financial perspective, and also just really generously giving of their time and services. And that's good for the organisation as well too. So when other people learn, the organisation is supporting Rosie's Friends on the Street, I think, actually, I want to support that organisation, because they're working, yes, they're delivering a good product and service, but actually they're not just purely thinking of themselves or purely of profit, that they are going beyond that.
Yeah, they've got that social conscience happening as well, which I think is really important. And I also think that people, or the public, are more conscious now of where they're buying and the sustainability practices of our purchases. I think that is really starting to infiltrate a lot of our thinking. And I think we've been hit with it in the face through the, going to the supermarket and automatically getting plastic bags to now getting paper bags. And first of all, we went through a phase where we just had plastic bags everywhere and used them for everything. And then we've gone to, we had to pay for them. Well, that hurt. Then we begrudgingly decided to bring our own bags, but half the time we forgot. And now we're to the paper bags. I think that's actually raised everyone's awareness. Like it just is in your face, and you now have to confront it. But I think as consumers, we're a little bit more conscious now of the products, of where we're getting things.
Yeah, and I think also from a defensive positioning, that often we were able to change that behaviour.
Yeah.
And we should take stock from that as well too, that we were able to change our behaviour in some little things. And within organisations, we are able to change behaviours. But often, sometimes when people are first confronted with it, or maybe they've got a staff member at a lower level and it's raised, often the response has been, kind of like, I don't want to listen to any of that. And so therefore people are silenced.
Yeah.
And if there's a really negative response from a one-up manager or a very senior manager, you'll think, okay, it's not safe to talk about that. So what they do is they self-censor because everybody's got either a mortgage or rent to pay. So, and they don't want to lose their jobs. So if we can make it safer for people to start putting forward these suggestions, raising these suggestions, but also, hey, something's not quite right here. I think we need a deeper dive into this area. So we need leaders to have the humility to realise they've not got the answers to everything. Indeed, many of the staff may have some really good answers, but also raising some points which are going to help them in the long run, even though it might seem in the short run, well, gee, this is something I really didn't want to think about.
Absolutely. So as a business, the takeaway for me here is it sounds like really good that UN Sustainable Goal Compass, is it, for the SME emissions calculator? That would actually be just such a good spot for them to start. Is that like, let's just demystify it? Let's just go, right, let's take one thing away from this conversation with you, which has just been amazing. You're the font of, and I love your passion. I'm so pleased we have people like you that are out there, really, really adopting those changes and teaching students to do it. I think you've got an event on tonight, haven't you? Or
Yeah. So at Bond University, Bond has a number of different values, but one of them is entrepreneurialism. And I get really excited in that space as well too, because the world has a number of wicked problems. We need entrepreneurs coming up with elements to solutions for that. And also there's, in a way, organisational culture space. Even if you're a large organisation, they're increasingly talking about the thing of the corporate or the sustainable corporate entrepreneur, which means within your organisation, you have some people who are really driving this change, but they won't be able to drive that change if they don't have the kind of like imprimatur, if they don't have the endorsement for senior people, and if there's not psychological safety between all the different subcultures. So the sustainable corporate entrepreneur is really needed within large organisations, but we also need lots of entrepreneurs coming up with solutions as well too, to make it easier for your mum and dad cafes that are out there.
So this is a conversation that's not going away. This is a conversation that is going to have to be adopted long term. So it's a conversation that everyone should start having and engaging in, whether you're a mum and dad coffee shop or whether you're a multi-organisation. It's just you have to start now, and you have to start that conversation. And particularly, everything you're going to do moving forward, whether you're going to be going for tenders, whether you're hoping to have something in the Olympics, Olympic 2032, whether you're going for funding or whether you're just being responsible to your, the people who are buying from you or purchasing. It's just the story that has to happen, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. And the reality is, unfortunately, we do have greenwashing. And so that might be a barrier for some people. Okay, I'm not going to engage in sustainability because of all the greenwashing that happens. That's just a reality. We've always had, anyway, since the dawn of time, people saying they're doing something that they're not really. Hold firm to your values and who you want to be known as a person for the long run. So start engaging in that space. Another thing I'll just say is that some people engaging in this space, there can be that eco-anxiety around that space. I'm a bit of a glass half full person, so I am really aware of all the challenges that are out there. But yeah, just watch yourself and watch the people around you as well too. So now I know there are even some psychologists who specialise in the eco-anxiety space to help people, so you don't end up going down a kind of like a negative spiral, a depressive spiral once you start entering and into the scale of what this encompasses. Because I still believe humans with business, well, we've created some of this problem, but humans with business, we can solve some of these problems as well too, and we don't have to do it all by ourselves.
No, absolutely. Look, it's been wonderful talking to you today, and very enlightening, by the way, but I'm going to ask you one last question. What is it about the Gold Coast that has made you personally call it home?
Just when I look even outside, I'm here at Bond University, and I look outside at the beautiful flora and fauna. And then when I go home, I can easily go for a walk along the beach. On weekends, often I don't get enough time after work. I can effectively take my kayak across the road and drop it into the Nerang River, which for the most part is really clean, and I can effectively kayak past Hotta, the home of the arts, or I can walk to Hotta as well too. But just being surrounded in nature, and there is so much going on in the world. Okay, we've got wars in a few different places. There's cost of living. We need to be surrounded by nature, and I feel just so spoiled where I am. And also, I'd like to say I'm really grateful for the traditional custodians of the land who have looked after our land and our waterways. So when I go out and there's a lake near here, I see the flying fish jumping in and out of the water, or I see the water dragons and their funny walk, or the birds and the bird song. It's delicious. So I came to the Gold Coast because it's delicious.
You sound like you're going to stay as well, which is benefit for us and the companies and the organisations, and for our next generation coming through. And there's a few things that are a takeaway too. What's of interest, and I might try and put some more actually on the webpage, we have Sustainable Gold Coast. On that webpage, we might put some information about your micro-credentials, because 7.5 hours for a business to just put their toe in, such a good thing to do. Like, that's such a good starting point. So I might follow up with things like that. But Dr. Clare Burns, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and very enlightening. Thank you so much for being our guest here today.
Estella, it's been such a joy. Thank you for this question. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening today. For a complete list of podcast episodes and transcripts, go to rdagoldcoast.org.au/podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter.